Welcome to Virtual Office Hours Exam Prep, sponsored by the American Bar Association. The Virtual Office Hours series connects you with experts to help you thrive as a law student and prepare you for life after law school. We're really excited today to have Professor Heather Varanini with us to share exam prep tips and to answer your questions. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat area at any time. Heather Varanini is the Associate Director of Academic Achievement and an Adjunct Professor at Golden Gate University School of Law. She works with all students to help them be successful in school from orientation to graduation and specializes in working with students with learning differences. She also hires, trains, and manages a group of teaching assistants each semester to develop their teaching and leadership skills. Professor Varanini teaches classes on academic success and bar readiness. You can talk to Professor Varanini on Twitter. Professor Varanini, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate that introduction. And welcome, everyone. It's so nice to have you today. So thank you for joining us. So I'm here to talk to you today, as you know, about exam prep. So let's get started. Well, it's likely that a very good chunk of your time, if not all of it, is going to get spent studying at home. So I'm going to start by talking about studying for finals effectively at home, right? We're going to talk about preparing for open book exams, since many schools actually moved online, right? And regardless of whether you have an open book exam this semester, you're going to have at least one during your law school career. So all of this information is going to apply regardless of whether your exam is open book or not, right? Studying and taking final exams requires the same set of skills, no matter what format the exam is in. So I'm going to start by talking about creating your study space and managing distractions. So the first question I get really is, should I study differently because I have a take-home or open book exam? And the answer might actually surprise you. It's no. The take-home exams, they bring their own challenges with them. They still require you to know the law and to analyze it. You have to be prepared prior to the day of your exam, because you cannot learn the law on the day of the exam and then expect to do well, right? And you also don't want to waste precious time thumbing through your notes when you don't have to. So preparing almost like you would for a closed book exam is a good way to go. But how in the heck do I prepare for a closed book exam? Well, generally speaking, throughout the semester, you want to stay up to date with your reading. You want to keep your outline or your main other study tool updated. You want to write practice exams and compare them to the model answer. And you want to do those practice multiple choice questions to test your understanding of the nuances, regardless of whether you have multiple choice questions on your test. But I'll be talking more about practice in just a few minutes. All right. So creating a study space that works well for you is pretty important. And this is really hard for many students whose living situation has changed dramatically since the pandemic began. But at this point, you probably already have a study space, but I really recommend that you consider rearranging it to work better for you. So to the extent that you can, create a separate space that's dedicated solely to studying, right? This is actually going to help your brain delineate school from not school, right? On a good day, it's hard enough to get your brain to kind of turn off, right? But really having that separate space is going to help you do that. Even if it's just a small corner of your apartment, and that corner is dedicated solely to studying. I also like to recommend having plenty of light, right? It's best when it's natural light, but this is really help you to do two things. Helps you to get to stay alert, right? And it's also all about being able to actually see what it is that you're doing. If you don't have natural light, make sure just to get one of those cheap lamps if you can. You also want to be have a place that's free of clutter, right? This is about helping your brain to focus. Less clutter means spending the time focusing on the things that you need to do, right? You also want to have easy access to the materials that you need to study. It's going to help minimize those distractions, right? Because everything's going to be there within reach, whether it's your highlighters, your Post-it notes, or your supplements. And the way that I know that this works is because I do it myself. As you can see behind me, I have a big shelf, right? There's, you can't see it, but there's some books behind me. There's also a lot of other books that I use on a daily basis. And there's also pens, Post-it notes, highlighters, all that stuff. I literally lean back and I grab what it is that I need. So when I'm in the middle of working something, I just go ahead and I grab it, right? I don't have to get up, get distracted by doing something else. And the same was true when I was a student studying. So speaking of distractions, right? You want to be managing those distractions. It's really important when it comes to managing your time effectively because your time is really precious as a law student, so you want to be using it wisely. So I recommend that turning off notifications on your digital devices. This is kind of a toughie right now in the digital age, right? But when it comes to your computer, turn on that do not disturb feature while you're studying. Put your phone on silent and put it out of reach. My phone right now is currently on airplane mode. I literally can't go to grab it, right? This is a habit I got into when I was a law student. I used to put my phone on silent, I'd put it on another room, and I would only check it when I was on a study break. It's the same thing I did when I was done bar study. And it was really helpful because I could get more work done that way. Do your hardest tasks first, right? This way you can all devote the majority of your energy to the hard stuff. This is a really good way to focus. One of my colleagues actually has a great article on tips about studying more effectively from home. This is another really good way to help yourself be more productive. So we're going to go ahead and put that in the chat later at the end. Since I'm kind of wrapping up this section, I wanted to check in with Tracy to see if there was any hands raised or if there's any questions so far.
We do not have any questions at this time, but if you do have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or to raise your hand.
Okay, perfect. Well, if we're not seeing any, then I'm going to move on. And then at the end of the next segment, we're going to ask for some more questions. So maybe some will pop up by then. All right. So another really important component to effective exam preparation I'm going to discuss today is time management. I actually talk about this all the time with students, and sometimes this is a surprise for folks who don't realize how important this can be. So generally speaking, doing well in law school and being a good attorney is all about preparation, right? As a law student, this means you're preparing for your classes and you're preparing for your exams, which is why you're here today. And as an attorney, very broadly speaking, most of your time in your work is preparation in the form of research and writing. This is really also about efficiency, right? It's so important to be efficient with your time. As you already know, you don't have a lot of it right now, right? You have so many classes to keep up with, to keep track of, right? And you have so many responsibilities outside of class that are demanding your attention too, right? This is true now more than ever with a pandemic and with everything else happening. Everything takes so much time, right? Sometimes it feels like stuff is taking double or triple the amount of time. And as a law student, you really don't have time to waste, right? So it's also about stress reduction. Managing your time means that you're setting limits, you're staying on track, and you're staying on top of stuff, right? And often that's actually going to help keep stress and anxiety at bay because you're not waiting until the last minute. I also like to say this is about developing and using good habits. Law school is really the best time to do this, right? This is a good time to deal with the stress and pressure of being a good lawyer. It's kind of a good trial run. You don't want to wait to become an attorney to try out those good, develop those good habits, right? You've got plenty of those high stress opportunities along the way that's going to require you to manage effectively right now. Again, law school is a good trial run. And when it comes to exams, right, you want to prioritize. This is about prioritizing your time, right? Identifying and spending the most time on issues that need the majority of your attention, right? Not all issues are actually created equal. For example, it will take you likely less time to analyze the traditional bases for personal jurisdiction than it will to analyze minimum contacts. Do I know that because I'm a law professor? No. Do I know that because I'm a wizard? No. I know that because I've done that many essays, right? And time again, when I've written an essay on personal jurisdiction, I know that one of them requires less time than the other. It's also about maximizing your points and your potential, right? You're going to spend the most time on essays that give you the most points. So for example, if you have a short answer question, you're going to spend less time on it than you would on the longer answer essay. This seems like an obvious thing, but trust me, when you get into the finals mode and things are really stressful, the obvious stuff is hard to remember, right? So look to the recommended amount of time that your professor provides as a guide, as well as the amount of points that they'll tell you that each thing is worth, right? So you want to spend more time in the places that require more of your time, in the things that will give you more points. And creating and using a study schedule is going to be the best way to manage your time, right? So here's a couple of things I recommend that you do. I always like to say, start with a blank calendar, right? You can find one searching online, look at your phone calendar. There's some really good ones on Microsoft Word. Always start with that stuff that's set in stone, right? That's the date and times of your classes. the date and times of your assignments when they're due, right? Always the day and times of your finals, holidays, birthdays, the stuff that doesn't move, right? Also, your final schedule. The second that it goes up at your law school, put it into your calendar, right? You want to know when all that stuff is because you build your finals study schedule wholly around your exams. I'm the kind of person that I like to be prepared. So I always like to know the rules in case there was emergency, right? Do you expect an emergency is going to happen? No, but you like to be prepared in case it does. Generally speaking, know where that information lives and generally know what to do in case something happens. And also be realistic, right? This is about being realistic with the amount of time you can spend studying. A lot of times we like to be very optimistic and think that we can knock stuff out in really big chunks of time, but that's actually not realistic for most people, especially right now, right? So it's okay to start with smaller chunks and then build breaks in. So consider whether you're the type of person that works in 20-minute blocks, 45-minute blocks, an hour block, or something else. And speaking of breaks, build them in and build in days off, right? It's so easy to skip through that stuff if you don't build it into your schedule. So your brain and body, they need the rest, especially to retain knowledge. And you have to get that rest to do well. So you always want to build those things in. And so when I said before that you want to be realistic with the amount of time that you can spend studying and schedule your study time accordingly, one way to really do that is by block scheduling. And this is about creating a block of time where you are studying actively and you're doing uninterrupted, right? You have uninterrupted time, right? This is about focusing on a particular subject. So you want to be considering a couple of things, right? This is about the length of time. We just talked about that, right? Being realistic and how much time you can spend in one sitting. Also considering the time of day, right? What time works best for you, right? When are you most alert? Do your hardest and most challenging stuff during that time. And consider whether or not you want to do one topic at a time or two, right? Or a mix over the course of the day. And as you build your schedule, right, you want to remember a couple of other things too. Again, build in those breaks in between blocks for a minimum of 10 minutes apiece, right? And again, don't forget to add in breakfast, lunch, and dinner too, because it's so easy to, once you start studying, to just blow through the breaks and blow through a meal period. And you have to take care of yourself. You have to build in time for this to keep yourself healthy. Keep in mind that this is a long haul. You probably heard a lot of people say this is a marathon, not a sprint. I'm only going to say that once because that's probably how you've heard it, right? But you have to sustain yourself throughout the study and finals period, right? So for our school at GGU, students have about 1 week for studying, and then they have 2 weeks for finals, right? And that's after a 14-week semester. So it's almost a month, right? So you have to sustain yourself that whole time. And right now it's probably the end of semester. You're heading towards that for all of you. And you're probably feeling some fatigue. You're probably feeling a little bit tired, right? And your instincts as you study is to have really long study sessions, probably without breaks. And then you might get to the end of that day. And because a lot of us are high achievers, a long list of to-do things. And at the end of the day, we want to just check off that one more thing, right? But keep in mind that you have more to go, right? And you don't want to burn yourself out before the day of the exam. The day of the exam, that's the day you got to show up, right? You got to show up, you got to do your best, right? It's got to be like the best day that you have. It has to be where you peak, right? So you want to show all the hard work that you've been doing this semester on exam day, and you don't want to burn yourself out before that. So I did say something about active studying, but like, what was I talking about, right? Well, active studying, right? This tends to mean when you're engaging with the material, right? You're learning something, right? And you're really working with it. And most of your study time should be active studying. That actually looks like writing out practice essays, actually practicing multiple choice questions, and making outlines, or whatever your main study tool is. And if we have active studying, that means that we likely have passive studying, right? You want less of your time to be passive because you're not quite engaging with the material in the same way, but it's still important to your study process that you do this. And it's really good to do passive studying when you don't have a lot of energy to be engaged, right? So it's like kind of sitting on the couch, maybe, right? Taking a walk, that sort of thing. So that looks like reviewing flashcards, right? It looks like memorizing the rules. It looks like skimming over past exams. You're not writing them out, but you're kind of skimming over them. And like I said before, we talked about the do's of creating a study schedule, and these are some don'ts, right? These are some things you want to avoid when you're creating and managing your schedule. So you definitely don't want to procrastinate, right? We're talking about managing your schedule so that you can avoid this altogether, right? You don't want to wait until the last minute, not only because it's going to increase those feelings of anxiety and stress, but because you simply can't cram. A law school is not like any other type of graduate program. It's not like undergrad. And cramming is just not, you can cram, but you won't be successful doing it. All right, so you're taking more than one class and they all need some of your attention. But it's very easy to be concerned or worried about one class in particular so that you spend all or most of your time studying for it. But part of why we're creating a schedule is to avoid doing this all together. All right, so many of my students tell me that part of their studying plan is to reread cases. Don't do this. This is a terrible idea. This is a waste of your time, right? Rereading cases actually isn't going to help you that much. If there's a couple of key cases that you want to review or that you want clarification on, that's different. You know, look to a study guide, talk to your professor, but rereading them, don't do it, right? Waste of time. All right, especially if you have an open book exam, remember that you cannot learn material for the first time during your exam period, right? You want to use your outlines as a reference tool. This means that you're going to be able to refer to it sometimes, but you don't want to waste that time rummaging around through it when you need to be focused writing your answers, right? You want to spend the majority of your exam time writing out the analysis, right? Because that's where you're going to get the most points. And don't forget to take care of yourself. I know I said it before, I'm going to say it again. I'm actually going to say it a couple more times, right? But the first things to go tend to be sleep, exercise, and eating healthy. So with sleep, usually is the first to go because you want to do more stuff. Like I said before, a bunch of us come to law school, we are high achievers, right? We love to do a bunch of stuff and check that stuff off our list, right? But neuroscience tells us that we have to get enough sleep to retain information and to be alert. And that tends to be 6 to 8 hours a night, right? So to get the most out of your studying time, you have to get enough sleep. And when it comes to exercise, it's pretty tough right now with COVID, right? Especially if you're in a place with it's really cold, right? Or inclement weather. So try some indoor workouts, try walking in place, right? There's some apps, there's free live sessions online, there's free workout videos. It's not the same, but it's gonna help, right? So behind me, you might actually see some pink things. They're small weights. Actually lift them every hour, no joke. And I also do a little bit of walking around the house. Is it the same as my favorite yoga studio? Heck no, right? Is it the same as walking around doing the stairs of my office? Of course it's not, right? But it's gonna have to do for now. And food, right? So it's so easy to grab those unhealthy snack foods. They're super tasty, right? We all love them. But right now your brain needs brain food to help you do well. And that means more fruits, veggies, and water, and a lot less caffeine, right? Because caffeine is gonna increase feelings of anxiety and stress, like anxiety in particular, a lot less sugar, and a lot less carbs. All right. So after all that, I just want to do a quick check-in with Tracy and see if we have any hands raised or any questions before I move on.
We do have a question
Mhm.
about distractions. How do you refocus? And how do along those lines, how do you know that you're ready to go back to that task?
That's a good question. Refocusing is kind of tough because once you've been distracted, it can take sometimes up to 20 or 30 minutes to actually refocus your attention. I would say there's a couple of different ways. Now, how do you know? How do you know exactly? I don't know. For me, it's me making a decision that that's what I'm going to do, and then I do it. But how you decide is kind of up to you. I think it's sort of about eliminating distractions for yourself to the extent that you can. I know that not everybody has that ability to do so. And then working, sometimes when you've been so distracted, sometimes you might want to build your focus back up. So that might be the opposite, right? So you might want to start with a task that is maybe low difficulty and then work your way back into something that's more difficult. So for example, do some passive stuff. So maybe you want to start memorizing a couple of flashcards, looking over them, and then work your way to a practice problem. So does that kind of answer the question about getting back into focus?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a good question. So speaking about practice, right? I think the single most thing that you can do to prepare for your law school exams and to be successful is practice, right? So I'm going to get more specific and talk about the different ways that you can do that to prepare for your exams. Right? But why, right? So you have to keep in mind, you're never going to feel ready, right? You're going to find a million excuses. The dog needs a walk, your hair needs a wash. You're probably going to clean your apartment like crazy. One of my best friends from law school told me that his apartment was never as clean as it was during the time that we had finals, right? Um, but here's the thing. This is really the most important thing that's going to prepare you, and here's why. It's actually the best preparation because you will become more familiar with the material and how it's tested. But more importantly, you're going to get used to analyzing. Remember that this is where the most of your points are. And doing the practice of analysis is going to be critical to your success, right? Keep in mind that you'll be tested on how you apply the facts of a given situation to the law, right? This is analysis. You're going to identify those key facts from the fact pattern, and then you're going to explain why they're important using because in relation to the rule that you've identified. It's almost like an equation, key fact, because, and then relate it to the rule, right? This, as you can tell, this is not simple memorization anymore. And to get good at this, you have to practice. This means practice essays and practice multiple choice questions. So it's going to help you learn the law better, right? As you practice and review your answers, you will learn the law better. You're going to understand the rules and how they work on a deeper level. So you're going to be able to issue spot more effectively. You're going to be able to organize your answers better, right? But more importantly, your analysis skills will improve. So I said something about practice essays, right? And we know that doing a number of them will help you be prepared for the exam because you can start to see patterns that arise, right? You're going to start to see the most tested issues within a subject, and you're going to get familiar with how your professor tests too. And all of this will also help to start reduce some anxiety as you get closer to test day. But what is that number, right? It tends to be about 3 to 5 practice essays per subject. And when you do write a practice essay, you always want to compare your answer to the model answer, right? Because model answers are good for issue spotting, organization, and analysis, right? And when it comes to issue spotting, you ask yourself, did I spot all the same issues as the model answer? When it comes to organization, is my answer organized in a similar way to the model answer? Did I use Iraq throughout my entire essay, right? Did I Iraq each and every issue that I spotted? And when it comes to analysis, you ask yourself, did we use the same key facts in our analysis section? Did we identify similar arguments? And did we both identify similar counter arguments? Right? Because you're comparing your answer to the sample answer to see how you did. And one way to do that is a chart. Excuse me. I know that law students can be really resistant to charts, but the truth is that when you're building a good habit, it's good to have some help. And charts are a good way to do that, right? Because you can actually compare and contrast side by side. And then once you get good at the self-assessment piece here, you don't have to use a chart anymore because you're going to start to do it more naturally, right? This is going to help you ask yourself, what did I do well? And you're going to start to see, all right, I did that really well, right? I identified all the key facts here, just like the model answer did. And then you're also going to start to see what you missed, right? You're like, you know, I missed 2 out of those 5 issues, right? And this gets you thinking about what you can do to you continue to do well as you practice, then what you need to continue to work on too. And I'll say a last thing here, which is that you need to be critical. But I'm going to be very specific. You have to be critical of your work, right? Not of yourself. This is so important. I hear a lot of students walk into my office and they'll say, I was so stupid. How could I miss that issue? No, that's being critical of yourself. Don't do that. Don't be hard on yourself. But being critical of your work is this. All right, so let's say your torts essay, the model answer had 10 issues that they spotted, right? And you spotted 7 of them. Being critical of your work is saying, okay, I missed 3 issues. That wasn't good, right? Because maybe you're a week out from your exam and you're like, I need to get a little bit better at issue spotting. That's like, all right, I need to figure that out. That I should have seen that, right? And you start to ask yourself, why is it that I missed those issues? Is it because I didn't read the fact pattern closely enough? Is it because I don't understand the rules well enough, right? That's being critical of yourself. And then you need to take those next steps to figure out how you can improve. So since I just talked about practice essays, I'm going to talk about practice multiple choice questions. Right? They're a really good study tool, and here's why and how you can use them. Okay? Also helps you understand the law better. right? Because they really help you drill down on those fine details in a way that sometimes essay questions don't quite capture, right? Multiple choice questions tend to test one element or a factor of a rule or the exception to it. And as you practice them and you review the answer explanations, this will really help you understand the law better. But you always want to have a reason, right? As you practice, you always want to have a reason for why you chose the right one as the right answer and why you eliminated each of the other three as wrong answers. Because the ability to articulate a reason for why you're choosing one as the right one and why you're eliminating each of the others as wrong is the key part of practice here. It's important, especially when you review those answer explanations. So what happens if when you practice, you get a wrong question, when you get a wrong answer, right? Remember that it's just practice, right? And it's better now to get it wrong during practice than on the test. You also want to think of it as a learning opportunity, right? A lot of success here in law school is about how you approach problems, right? Law school students like yourself, you are smart and hardworking, right? You got here for a reason. If you're approaching problems as opportunities to improve, it's likely that you will for a lot of reasons, right? And one of those is because when you see a similar problem in the future, you're likely going to remember that you made the mistake and then you'll work to fix it, right? But if you look at every single problem as a hurdle or as a pitfall, right, it's going to be much, much, much more difficult to get better when you just see everything as a roadblock. But you also want to find out why, right? So check that answer explanation. This is going to help you avoid making the same mistake again. It will also likely help you clarify your understanding of the law, because maybe you got the question wrong because you didn't quite understand how an element worked or how an exception applied. But what happens if you get it right, right? Do you just walk away and you're like, great, I'm done? No, you actually want to check that answer explanation, right? This means even if you get that question right, read that explanation to ensure that you're getting the questions right for the right reasons, as you like to say on The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, right? Meaning that you want to increase the chance of getting them right as often as humanly possible. All right, a couple more things. Never hesitate to ask for help. One of the things that I see law students do all the time is suffer in silence. Do not do this, right? Your law school has resources available to you, so use them. Some of them are in the form of your professor. Talk to your professors. Right? I just talked to a student who told me, I do not want to talk to my professor because she is scary. I had a professor in law school who was very gregarious and outgoing, and he just kind of put on a show in class all the time. So when I went to see him in his office hours, he talked like this. He was so quiet. I used to have to, I would like lean in to have to hear him. He's a great guy. He's actually a federal judge right now. He's wonderful. But know that sometimes the person that you see in class is not the person that you'll get one-on-one, and that can actually be a good thing. So don't be as quite as afraid of them, right? Talk to your TAs too. They're there to help you, right? And they've been in your shoes recently. And don't hesitate to talk to your academic support department. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but most schools actually have an entire department like mine that's dedicated wholly to your success in law school. So use those resources available to you, right? That's exactly what they're there for. It's not cheating, right? They're there just to help you be successful. So that's past exams and model answers. Right? This is a great study tool that you can use. So when you're asking yourself, how is it that I can practice essays? Go to that bank, right? Look at those past exams and write them out in full, right? And then compare your answer to the model answer. You're going to start to see how your professor tests. You're going to see those frequently tested issues, and then you're going to understand how those topics are organized. In that academic support department that I just mentioned, again, it's a whole department that has a name similar to that. Mine's called academic achievement, used to be called, some of them are called academic success, some similar name, right? Again, dedicated totally to your student success, right? That's what they're all about. They generally do two things by and large, which is answer substantive law questions, right? So for example, if you want to know what the personal jurisdiction is, they can help you with that, right? If you want to know what the Commerce Clause is all about, they can talk to you about that as well. But ASP departments tend to focus mostly on helping you build the skills that you need to be successful in law school, right? So for example, if you want to learn how to outline, if you need feedback on your practice essays, right? You want to talk about time management. They're a good place to go for that, right? So for me, I talk a lot too about those things. And as Tracy said before, I specialize in working with students who have learning differences. So we work a lot too about creating study plans and management schedules. See if your school has a partnership with Cali. They have text-based lessons on substantive law and skills, right? So for example, if you want to learn some memorization techniques, they have some really great lessons on that. For us, we have a California Wills and Trusts class. They have great outlines on California Wills and Trusts. They actually have great lessons on that as well too. And past bar questions, right? If you have a state that posts their past bar questions, you might want to use those to practice if you're looking for more questions than what your professor has posted, right? Let's say you've exhausted all the resources at your school. This is a good place to go. California always posts its past questions on the website and 2 model answers. The caveat here is that your law professors likely want more detail than what the state bar does, right? But it's still a good resource. So before I move on, I just wanted to check in with Tracy to see if there were any questions or any hands raised as I was going through that part.
Sure, we have a couple of questions. Stepping back to study schedules first, we have someone who says that their school recommends a study schedule where they study and practice for their first exam last. For example, this week they're studying for contracts, next week for torts, then they'll take the torts exam and then take the contracts exam. Is this common, and are there other study schedule options that work better?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good piece of advice, and it's likely that part of the reason they gave that piece of advice too is to ensure that all subjects got like equal coverage, right? Because I think that's the goal in giving that advice, is to make sure that each thing gets attention. Because a lot of times what happens too is that students tend to study most for the first exam they have, and they forget to study for the last exam or give it enough attention. How you study and how much attention that you give something, like I was saying, it's good to try to give relatively equal coverage to everything, but how you go about doing that is really up to you. I actually like that idea, study for that first exam last. Do I have better or different advice? Not really. Again, like I said, I like to do the blocking, and how I go about blocking, or how I went about blocking in law school, was just based on, I think I did something actually similar to that, now that I think about it, because I was so worried that I would just either spend too much time with that first exam or the class that I was worried about the most. And sometimes you'll hear this too. You'll hear a good piece of advice and then you're going to hear it repeated. And is it because that we all talk to each other and say the same thing? No, sometimes good advice is just good advice in law school.
Great. We have another question here regarding essays. Are there any practice essay tools that you recommend?
Tools. I think this is one of those things where using those past exams and model answers from your school's website is a really good thing to do. I think that's just kind of what you got to do. I would say just sit down with one of them and just have your notes open, and don't time yourself, just to get started. Kind of a low pressure environment, and to just walk your way through it and just write it out. And then review your answer. And if you want someone to help you just to get some feedback, go to your academic success department. Other than that, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how to do it. And that's usually the best way kind of to get started. There's really no like shortcut or kind of trick other than doing it that way.
Great. And then we have one other question here regarding business law essay questions.
Mhm.
If there are 7 issues,
Mhm.
do I need an issue, rule analysis, and conclusion for each? If
Yes.
so, how do I organize my outline to answer succinctly?
Yeah. So for each issue that you spot, you have to have a separate IRAC, right? Um, and you take them one at a time. So imagine that each IRAC is a bucket, right? So for example, I'm just going to use torts because it's the first thing I'm thinking of. Sorry, I know you said business associations, but that's not what's coming into my mind right now, so I apologize. So for example, let's say you have you're taking a torts exam and you spot assault, battery, and negligence. You spot those 3 things as issues. Consider them all as buckets. So you write out an IRAC for assault, you write one out for battery, and then you write one out for negligence, right? So what I mean when I say that is that you only are talking about assault in the assault IRAC. You only talk about battery in the battery IRAC, and you only talk about negligence in the battery IRAC, right? So they're wholly separate when you talk about them. So you do issue, rule, application, conclusion for the assault. And when you're done with that, you're done with it, right? You never talk about that assault ever again. And then you move on to the battery. And then once you're done with that segment, you never talk about that battery again. And then once you're done, and then you go through the negligence, you finish that, and you don't talk about negligence after that once you're completely finished. So if you think about them as buckets that are kind of separate, that might help you as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So now that you've created and used your study schedule and you've been practicing, we're getting to the day of the exam. All right. I'm going to give you a water is wet kind of piece of advice here, so bear with me. You want to treat it like a final. What does this mean? This means that some schools have actually added time to their final exams, especially when they've been open book. So my school typically has 3-hour exams, and now they've been giving 6-hour exams. So what I mean by that is if you have more time than usual, you're not going to be able to learn areas of law that you don't already understand prior to exam day. So you have to start the exam ready, right? You have to know the rules and know their exceptions to be ready to write the exam. Reduce your distractions, right? You still have to work in an environment with little or no distractions to improve your focus, right? If you were actually at school, sitting in the exam environment, it would probably be very quiet. Nobody would be talking. Everyone would just be focused, right? And to the extent that you can, it's almost like what you'd want to do at home, right? So if you think that you need headphones or earplugs and you don't already have them, get some if you can, right? If you have a room to yourself, or if you live with other people, put everybody on notice, right? Say, hey, I've got this exam coming up, slap a note on the door, do whatever you can, right? Let people know, hey, I've got an exam, this is serious business, I need to do well, right? Also, read the directions, right? I know this sounds like obvious, this sounds some of like this obvious advice, but it's really important, right? Because sometimes too, professors might give directions around formatting. I want Times New Roman 12-point font, double space, whatever it is. Don't lose easy points by failing to do that. This also means that you want to answer the call of the question, right? So a lot of times too, when you're writing an exam, I call it exam brain. I actually had diagnosed test anxiety when I was in undergrad. That's when I got diagnosed. And so what happened would be that I get into the exam and I would just like, I felt like everything like dropped out of my ears. It was really terrible. And I say that to say this, which is that I call this exam brain. So I get in and I get exam brain and I just couldn't really think straight. So answering the call to question is so important because you want to answer what's being asked of you and not what you want to be asked, because sometimes it's very easy to kind of start writing your answer and kind of get a little lost, right? So make sure that you're also answering the questions being asked of you so that you don't miss those easy points. You also want to stay, you also want to deal with those other limits, right? And stay within them as required by your professor, right? You don't want to edit as you go because then you might not have, you might not actually finish the entire exam. You want to finish the entire exam. So what you want to do though, is you want to do a little bit of time management here. So set aside some time at the top. If you find out what those limits are, set aside some time at the top, let's say 30 minutes, give yourself a hard stop time and then do the editing. So for example, if you have a 4-hour exam window, say, I'm going to give myself 30 minutes. I'm going to hard stop at 3 hours and 30 minutes. And then I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to edit. And that's exactly what you do, right? So that you stay within that word limit or page count or whatever it is. And then you're also the other limits, they're your professor's expectation, right? They provide those limits to see what you can do within that time frame or that word count or limit or whatever, right? There's a tendency to write more and to do more, but you really want to be careful because this can actually work to your detriment. There's usually a set number of issues that your professor is looking for, and for you to spot within that limit that they've given you. And going too much beyond that shows that you might not be able to identify the relevant issues in the rules. So what happens once the clock starts ticking? Well, I recommend this. You read and then you outline. So based on the time limit for your exam, spend a set amount of time reading the fact pattern and the call of the question, and then outlining your response before you begin writing your essay. So this should be about 10 to 15 minutes per hour-long essay. That's actually what I use. And you want to read that fact pattern more than once. But remember, once you're done, you don't want to go back, right? But what do I mean by outline? I mean a roadmap to answering the call to question, right? That's the thing that you're going to use that's going to help guide you spending all that time answering your question. So you want to do your first read. You want to kind of get the lay of the land, understand what the heck is going on in this crazy fact pattern, because a lot of them are pretty crazy, right? So understand what's happening, understand that call to question, figure out what's going on, but don't touch anything. Have at least a second read through, right? This is when you begin to kind of mark up that fact pattern, right? Mark stuff up. And then you want to start to issue spot and outline. And what do I mean by outline exactly? That means you write your issue. I used to write the name of the rule, and then I'd identify each key fact I wanted to use in my analysis. And I did that for each issue that I spotted. Again, this was my roadmap to answering the call to question, right? And each time that you reread the fact pattern and the call to question, you're picking up more information along the way, right? Again, once you do this, and if you use this strategy and you have your outline, you never look back. And what I mean by that is this. A lot of times I talk to students who they don't do this, and then they'll get part of the way through the essay. They stop, they second guess themselves. They'll literally delete all the work they've done or part of the work that they've done, and they've just kind of wasted a lot of time, right? Don't do that. Trust yourself, trust all the hard work that you've been doing up front, that outlining technique that you've done, right? And keep going, keep writing, right? This is also something that you want to do when you're practicing so that you get used to it, right? So that by the time that you get to the exam and that you're doing this, that you're used to it. Also leave time at the end, right? Again, editing like we talked about, and also time for upload or technical problems, right? So give yourself 15 or 20 minutes for those technical problems and tack that on to the editing and do the math, right? Have a hard stop time for writing, and then have time for editing, and then have time for uploading. Build that time management into your exam. All right, we're getting close to the end here. I'm gonna have a few more study tips before I wrap up. So, but what happens if you're studying and you start to feel like this, right? You're feeling all crazy. You maybe felt this way once already this semester. I'm gonna tell you a secret that probably nobody's told you already. This happens to everybody. But the problem with law school is that everyone's poker face is amazing. Everyone looks like they're doing great. They look smarter than you. They look like they're getting all A's and you're failing, right? The truth is everybody feels this way once or more than once, right? But if you're starting to feel this way, here's what you do. Start to take care of yourself, right? This is your body's way of telling you that it's time to take care of yourself, right? And here's a couple of things you should consider. Take a break, right? Because by the time that you start feeling this way, it's probably been a little while, right? Get something to eat or drink, because before you know it, it's probably been a while, right? Because for me, when I used to study, whether it's for the bar or for law school, I would look at the clock and I'd be like, oh, I haven't had a snack in like, oh, that's been too long. So get up, even if it's just a glass of water, get something to eat or drink. Exercise, right? Even if it's just a quick walk, get the blood flowing. Meditate, right? So part of what makes law school so challenging, there's a lot of stuff, but aside from managing all the material, is managing the stress of everything. And one way that can help you do that is meditation, right? So a really good way to manage stress, anxiety, insomnia, meditation, right? There's a lot of free apps or apps that have free components, whether that's Insight Timer or My Life, right? There's also free guided meditations on YouTube. Talk to somebody, right? This can be a family member. This can be a non-law school friend. This can be somebody at the law school, right? But also look to see if your school offers mental health resources. Luckily for us at GGU, we have those. We use the Meta app right now. We give all law students 2 free sessions, right? The ABA also has resources available. We're gonna put one in the chat later. There's a really good article. It has a lot of really good therapy related stuff. It also has substance use issue related resources as well. It's really good and it's really comprehensive. So don't hesitate to look for and seek out that stuff. All right. So my last like substantive slide here. In my opinion, part of what makes law school very hard is that it demands everything from you. It's almost like it expects the world to stop spinning on its freaking axis, right? Because it wants everything, right? But the truth is that life happens, right? You have a whole life that is outside of law school. and that needs your attention. So I recommend a couple of things for you. Show yourself some compassion and some flexibility, right? And I recommend that you do the same for your loved ones because you want their continued love and support through law school and after, right? And as it continues to be difficult, think back to why you wanted to do this to begin with, right? And at some point, or at more than one point, many of us, we wondered why we came to law school. We wondered if law school was even the right place. We wondered if we even belonged in law school or in the profession of lawyers, right? So many of your professors and successful attorneys have felt this way too. I say this because I know that, that's how I felt. And many students tell me that they feel the same way every semester. So here's what I suggest that you do when things get difficult. I recommend that you read your personal statement to remind you why you came to law school to begin with, right? Law school is hard and there's no getting around that, right? So you have to find that thing that keeps you going when it's tough. But I'm also gonna remind you that you can do this, right? A lot of people believe in you, right? You didn't get here, most of you didn't get here alone, right? You can do this. There are people at the law school that believe in you. And also you worked so hard, right? And you're here now, right? It's almost the end of the semester, right? You're so close. But this is something you should be celebrating, right? You're almost all the way through your first semester of law school. Some of you maybe are other parts of your law school career. You've made it this far, right? And it's something to celebrate. So don't forget that, right? I give pep talks all the time. If you need a pep talk, hit me up. I'm here to do that. And speaking of which, thank you so much for listening, right? If you ever have questions, don't hesitate to email me. Don't hesitate to hit me up on Twitter. I'm always happy to chat with you. And I'm so excited for you and for your law school careers. So I'm gonna stop sharing and then take some questions.
Great. We have a few other questions that
Sure.
have come in. And if you have any questions, anyone out there, please just drop them in the chat. First, an outlining question. When it comes to outlining, should we memorize our outlines or just focus on memorizing rules and elements? I've gotten mixed answers.
Good, okay. That's a good question. So the answer is it's a little bit of both, right? So the truth is that your outline is your understanding of the material, right? So throughout the semester. And theoretically too, it's your guide to answering any question on a law school exam. So it's going to be a little bit of both, right? You have to know the rules and the elements, right? You can't get around that, and that's going to be how you successfully answer each of those questions or any question that comes your way. But sometimes too, there's stuff in your outline that you need to know in order to answer those questions as well, right? So your outline should contain all the stuff that you need to answer any question. So including rules and elements. So I think more clearly, my answer is your outline, as long as it's effective, should be able to answer any question that comes at you. So yes, it should be, which is rules and elements, and therefore you should have your outline memorized if you're headed into a closed book exam. Right now, the good news is that like I said, a lot of schools have open book exams. You should know and understand the material, but you don't necessarily have to have it straight organized. So that was my long way of getting around to this answer.
Thank you. We have a question about cases. How to keep track of all the cases for an exam, especially for torts, where the textbook and the professor talk about them in passing.
Yes, this is a really good question. This comes up a lot. So it's important to know which cases are really, so it's really important to differentiate how important a case is, right? So some cases are more important than others. You can kind of tell because your professor will maybe talk a lot about a particular case and maybe not really talk about other cases. And so the more, so when a professor talks a lot about one case, as it relates to a rule, it's likely that you're going to need to reference that case, right? If they're not talking about it a whole lot, it's likely that you don't have to talk about that on your exam, but don't ever hesitate to ask your professor directly. Say, do I need to reference this case on my exam, right? Because some of them will say yes, some of them will say no, right? But the process of actually identifying which ones are the critical ones and which ones maybe are not so important to reference on your exams, that's something that you kind of have to work throughout the semester. I know that's not the answer that you want to hear, but that is the answer.
Great. We have another question here too, and this is our final question. Unless anyone else has another question, like we mentioned, just drop it in the chat. So this last question that we have is, what is the best way to write a rule statement?
Rule statement. This is a great question. There's not a singular best way to write a rule statement, right? Again, these are answers people don't love to hear because I think as a law student, you just want there to be one right answer. And the truth is, as a law student, you have to get used to the fact that a lot of times there's not one singular right answer. There's a lot of gray area. And the good news is that there's a lot of different ways you can approach a problem. So that's my long way of saying, to write a rule statement, there's a couple of things that you can do. It's about pulling from different sources and creating a rule statement that's succinct yet accurate and accounts for exceptions. Right? How do I do that exactly? Well, that's the process of taking your notes from class, taking what's in your case brief, right? And putting that stuff together, right? And then synthesizing that down into something that's 1 to 2 sentences, right? Sometimes I will, you didn't ask this, but I'm gonna tell you anything. What I see a lot in students' outlines are questions. A lot of times your professor will pose a question in class and you'll put that in your outline. I'm going to tell you that questions are not useful in your outline because they don't help you answer the question in your exam. So what you'll do instead is turn it into an affirmative statement. So if you can change a question into an affirmative statement, that will likely help create a good rule statement for you, right? So instead of saying, I get a lot of questions about like, they're just, what I mean about questions in the rule statement, sorry, is that sometimes there'll be something like, is this an undue burden on interstate commerce as it relates to dormant commerce clause? Well, it's more likely that when something is an undue burden on interstate commerce, then it violates the dormant commerce clause. So turning something around from a question into an affirmative statement will help you create that rule statement.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone for joining us today, and a special thank you to Professor Varanini. And as Professor Varanini said, you can do this. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.